After a peaceful 3-month retreat in Kyoto, I was flying home, just picturing the look on my daughter's face. I thought she'd come running to greet me, but no, my little girl was in the ICU, clinging to life, while her husband was off living it up in Aspen, Colorado, a playground for the mega-rich, with his mistress. As a mother, I couldn't just let that stand. So I set out to make him regret the day he ever crossed our family. Stick around, and I'll tell you exactly how it all unfolded. My name is Eleanor Sterling. At 72, most folks are looking for a little peace and quiet, and I was no exception. My late husband, Richard Sterling, was the founder of Sterling Industries, a leading pharmaceutical and biotech corporation. After Richard passed and I had settled the company's affairs, the thing I craved most was silence. That's why I spent 3 whole months in Kyoto, soaking in the simple beauty of the rock gardens and the quiet dignity of the ancient temples. There, amidst the gentle chime of temple bells and the scent of cedar, I found a sense of balance I thought I had lost for good. The flight from Tokyo touched down at Boston's Logan Airport on a late autumn afternoon. The New England air was crisp, carrying that smell of damp leaves and the promise of a coming winter. It was a world away from the serenity of Kyoto, but it was home. As my private car glided down familiar roads, my heart warmed at the thought of seeing Claire, my only child. I hadn't told her I was coming back. I wanted to surprise her, to see her eyes light up when she saw me at the door. Most of all, I wanted to see her 8-month belly with my own 2 eyes, carrying the sole heir to the Sterling legacy. "Straight to Beacon Hill, Mrs. Sterling?" James, my loyal driver of nearly 20 years, asked through the partition. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "No, James, let's go to Wellesley first. I want to stop by my daughter's." 45 minutes later, the car turned onto the oak-lined street that led to Claire and Julian's house. It was a charming colonial, a wedding gift from Richard and me. I'd always felt a familiar warmth coming here. But today, as the car pulled up, a cold sense of unease crept into my chest. The house was completely dark. Not a single light shone from a window. The lawn, usually so perfectly manicured, was overgrown and turning yellow. A week's worth of newspapers lay scattered on the walkway, damp with evening dew. You see, I was a lawyer in my younger days. My mind is trained to spot things that are out of place, and this scene was a blaring alarm bell. Claire, the meticulous daughter I raised, was a perfectionist. She would never let her home, her nest, fall into such disrepair. "Perhaps they went out for dinner, ma'am," James said, a note of concern in his own voice. I shook my head, my hand already trembling as I reached for my phone. "No, James, something's wrong." I called Claire. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Her cheerful, recorded greeting, months old, now sounded like a painful echo from another world. I called Julian. The same result. My heart began to pound, a fear I hadn't felt since the day Richard was hospitalized for the last time. "Get your people on this now," I ordered, my voice firm to hide the tremor. "Check the major hospitals in the area. She's pregnant." The search felt like a nightmare. The first 2 hospitals had nothing. But at Brigham and Women's, when I shakily gave the name Claire Vance, the woman at the reception desk looked at me with pity in her eyes. "Are you family?" I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. "Please have a seat. I'll have Dr. Miller come speak with you." Those 15 minutes in that sterile waiting room felt like an eternity. The sharp smell of antiseptic and the cold fluorescent lights grated on my nerves. I clutched the pearl bracelet on my wrist, a gift from Richard, trying to hold on to something familiar. Finally, a middle-aged man with tired eyes walked out. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm Dr. Miller. Please come with me." He led me down endless corridors, and his silence was more terrifying than any words. We stopped outside the ICU. Through the thick glass, I saw my daughter. And my world simply fell apart. My Claire, my radiant, vibrant girl, was lying motionless amidst a tangle of tubes and machines. Her skin was as pale as the sheets, her lips were chapped, and her thick, dark hair was matted against the white pillow. But the thing that truly shattered my heart was the sight of her pregnant belly. My grandchild, the legacy of the Sterling family, was inside a mother who was on the verge of death. "What happened?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "A neighbor found her unconscious in her home 2 days ago," Dr. Miller explained gently. "She was in critical condition when she arrived. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, and signs of prolonged psychological distress led to complications with the pregnancy. We're doing everything we can save them both." 2 days? I repeated, unable to believe it. "My daughter has been here for 2 days?" "Yes, ma'am. Where is her husband? We've tried to contact him multiple times with no success." "He said he was on a business trip," I answered mechanically, my mind racing, "in Zurich." Dr. Miller nodded, but a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. "We'll need family consent for a few procedures. It's a good thing you're here." I didn't hear the rest of what he said. My mind was stuck on one question. Why? Why would a young, healthy woman who had everything collapse like this? And where was her husband, the man who was supposed to be caring for her? Zurich. It was such a clumsy lie. Why Zurich? It was too far, too convenient. A chill went down my spine. The moment the doctor left, I pulled out my phone. I scrolled past friends, past business contacts. I only needed one number. Arthur Vance, my family's lawyer, Richard's closest confidant, and the one person on this earth I could trust completely. He picked up on the first ring. "Eleanor, you're back. How was the trip?" His warm, familiar voice was a lifeline, but I had no time for pleasantries. "Arthur," I said, my voice sharp. The tranquility of Kyoto had vanished, replaced by the cold steel of a warrior. "I'm at Brigham and Women's. Claire is in the ICU." There was a dead silence on the other end. My God, what happened? I don't have the whole story yet, but Julian lied about being in Zurich. I don't believe him. I took a deep breath. The rage and pain were screaming inside me, but my voice was steady, precise as a scalpel. "I need you to start immediately. Investigate Julian Croft. Everything. Credit card transactions, flight records, phone calls, relationships. I want to know where he is, who he's with, and what in God's name he was doing while my daughter was lying here dying." "I'm on it, Eleanor." Arthur's voice had become steely too, all business. I hung up, my eyes never leaving Claire's fragile form through the glass. The mother in me was screaming, but the lawyer, the fighter, had taken control. I sat by Claire's bedside in a private room I'd had the hospital arrange. She was still lost in an exhausted sleep, her lovely face now gaunt and pale. I took her hand, feeling how delicate it was in mine. I sat there for hours, watching every shallow breath, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, a cruel reminder of how fragile life is. The initial blaze of anger had cooled into a cold, determined resolve. The serenity I learned in Kyoto was no longer about peace. It was the deadly focus of a predator waiting to strike. The next morning, Arthur came to the hospital. His expression was graver than I had ever seen it. He said nothing, just quietly placed a thin file on the table beside the bed. "Zurich was a lie, just as you suspected," Arthur began, his voice low and even. "Julian Croft never booked a flight to Switzerland. He's in Aspen, Colorado." Aspen? Not a financial hub, but a playground for the rich and famous, a place where champagne and snow flow freely. I closed my eyes, picturing Julian laughing on a snow-covered slope, a grotesque contrast to my daughter lying here dying. "Who is he with?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Claire's supplementary credit card was used to pay for a suite at the Little Nell Hotel, booked for 2. His companion is a model named Kennedy Hayes. Arthur paused, showing me a photo printed from social media. A young, flashy blonde pouting for a selfie against a snowy backdrop. She was wearing a diamond necklace I recognized instantly. It was the one Julian had given Claire for their wedding anniversary last year. A wave of nausea rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Cheating and leeching money. Vile, but almost ordinary. Julian was an ambitious man, I knew that. But was that all this was? My gut was screaming that there was something far deeper, far darker at play. That's not all, is it, Arthur? I looked him straight in the eye. He nodded, his face growing even darker. No, Eleanor. I reviewed Richard's will, as you asked. He took a deep breath. Do you remember the mortality clause? How could I forget? A clause I had fought against when Richard first drafted it. I'd thought it was too cruel, too cynical. But Richard, with his terrifying foresight, had insisted. Better to be safe than sorry, my dear, he had said. Arthur explained it again, though I knew every word by heart. The trust fund, the controlling shares, and that grim condition. If Claire were to pass away before her heir turned 18, full control of Sterling Industries would be transferred to her legal husband. A perfect excuse for corporate stability. And just like that, all the broken pieces slammed together into one horrifying picture. Claire's condition, Julian's lies, the trip to Aspen. It wasn't a coincidence. He doesn't just want her money, Arthur, I whispered, the cold truth slithering down my spine. He wants it all. He wants the Sterling Empire. And he wants Claire out of the way to get it, Arthur finished for me. Her condition, it doesn't look like a typical breakdown. It looks like a systematic one, like a slow poisoning. Poison. The word hung in the still air of the hospital room, vile and sickening. I looked down at my daughter. The man she had given her heart and her trust to was the same man who had been pushing her, day by day, to the brink of death, right inside their own home. I see, I said, my voice now cold as ice. Richard was right. He saw this wolf long before we did. The will wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. And Julian just walked right into it. What do we do, Eleanor? I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city of Boston below. The world just kept on going, completely unaware of the evil plot unfolding in this room. First, I said, turning back, my eyes now sharp as razors, we need undeniable proof. Arthur, contact Dr. Miller. Request a comprehensive deep dive toxicology screen for Claire. Use my name. Say it's standard procedure for our family's VIP patients. We can't raise any suspicion. Understood. Second, hire the best private investigators you know. I don't just want to know about the model. I want to know everything Julian has done for the past 6 months. Who he met, who he talked to, especially anyone with a background in biochemistry or pharmaceuticals. Dig into every shady financial transaction, every computer search. Leave no stone unturned. And in the meantime, Arthur asked. In the meantime, I said, a cold smile touching my lips, we make our first move. Freeze all of Julian Croft's assets. Every bank account, every credit card, every investment in his name. The legal grounds, misappropriation of shared assets, and abandonment of a spouse in a medical emergency. I want his lifeline cut. I want him to feel the panic. I want him to think I've only discovered his cheap little affair. Let the wolf think he's caught in a small snare, while the entire forest burns down around him. Julian Croft was raising a glass of champagne with Kennedy Hayes in a lavish mountaintop restaurant. He felt on top of the world. His plan was working perfectly. Claire was breaking down, just as he'd intended. Just a little more time. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. An email from his bank. His credit card had been declined. He frowned, trying another. Declined. A prickle of unease. Then came an urgent email from his lawyer. Your accounts have been frozen by Mrs. Sterling. Call me immediately. The champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. The smile vanished. He looked out at the majestic, snowy landscape, but all he saw was not victory, but the rising tide of panic and rage. The prey he thought he had cornered had suddenly bared its teeth. Back in Boston, I got a call from Arthur. Eleanor, I have something significant. The investigators found that over the past 2 months, Julian has had multiple meetings with David Chen.
David Chen. The name stopped me cold. A member of the Sterling Industries board, a brilliant man who had always been resentful, feeling he was overlooked by Richard. Chen is in Aspen, Arthur continued. Surveillance photos show him and Julian met at least 3 times in the last 2 days. They don't look like they're on vacation. They look like they're plotting. I looked at the board member profiles Arthur had sent. A bigger conspiracy was taking shape. Julian wasn't acting alone. He had an ally inside my own fortress. He didn't just want the inheritance. He wanted to take over the entire corporation with an inside coup. Good work, Arthur, I said, my voice frighteningly calm. Keep watching them. I want to know what promises the rat made to the wolf. I hung up and turned back to Claire. She stirred slightly, a small moan escaping her dry lips. I gently stroked her hair, and for a moment my ironclad resolve nearly melted. But I held it back. This was no time for weakness. This was a time for war. This battle wasn't just about getting justice for Claire. It was about protecting Richard's legacy, protecting the future of my unborn grandchild, and proving to men like Julian Croft that while wolves may be clever, they are no match for a queen defending her kingdom. The next 2 days passed in a tense silence. I barely left the hospital, turning Claire's private room into my command center. Arthur fed me constant updates through encrypted calls, and the pieces of Julian's criminal puzzle fell into place. The PIs confirmed that Julian had purchased a compound derived from a South American plant on the dark web. It wasn't immediately lethal, but in small, steady doses, it slowly destroyed the nervous system, causing symptoms of paranoia, exhaustion, and eventually heart failure. A perfect match for Claire's condition. Meanwhile, Julian was scrambling like a cornered animal. Cut off from his funds, he couldn't keep up the lavish Aspen lifestyle. His mistress, Kennedy Hayes, realizing her gold mine had run dry, quickly posted a vague message about empty men and flew back to L.A. Julian was forced to fly back to Boston in coach, a humiliation I knew was eating away at his pride. I was ready for him. I had briefed hospital security and instructed Dr. Miller that only Arthur and I were permitted to see Claire. I needed to control the stage for the coming performance. On the 3rd afternoon, he arrived. I was reading by Claire's bed. She was a bit more alert, though still terribly weak. The door burst open. Julian stormed in, his face haggard with fatigue and anger, but he had managed to plaster on a look of perfect anguish. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair hastily combed, and his eyes held a fraudulent glint of worry. "Claire! Oh, thank God you're awake!" He rushed toward the bed, reaching for my daughter's hand. I shot to my feet, my small frame a solid barrier. "Stop, Julian. Don't you dare come near her." He turned to me, his expression shifting from concerned to wounded. "Mother, why are you treating me like this? I was worried sick about Claire when I heard. I flew back immediately." He said it as if his nearly 3-day journey was some kind of miracle. I let out a small, contemptuous smile. "I'm sure you did. It must have been so difficult to tear yourself away from the ski slopes of Aspen and your little girlfriend." The color drained from Julian's face. He knew that I knew about the affair. This was the reaction I wanted. He would think this was just about the fury of a rich mother-in-law. "Mother, I can explain," he began his pre-rehearsed speech. "It was a stupid mistake. the pressure from work. I messed up. But I love Claire, only Claire. Please believe me." He turned to my daughter, his eyes welling up. "Claire, baby, I'm so sorry. I was a jerk. Can you forgive me?" Claire, weak against the pillows, looked at him, a fragile flicker of hope still in her eyes. It pained me to see it. Her love for this monster ran so deep that even now she was trying to find a reason to believe him. "That's enough, Julian," I cut through his act, my voice like ice. "Do you think we're here, in this intensive care unit, to discuss your pathetic little mistakes? You've made a much bigger one, a betrayal you can't possibly explain away."
Julian stared at me, his expression shifting from remorse to defense. "What are you talking about? Other than my mistake in Aspen, I've done nothing wrong. I've always loved and cared for Claire." "Cared for her?" I repeated the words, letting them hang in the air like a bitter poison. "Well, let me ask you, while you were caring for your wife, did you have time for this?" I walked slowly to the table where Arthur had discreetly left a file. I pulled out a photograph and placed it down. It was a long lens shot, but perfectly clear. Julian, sitting in a Back Bay coffee shop across from David Chin, the Sterling Industries board member. Their faces were grim, deep in what was clearly a serious discussion. "How do you explain this meeting, Julian? It took place just 3 days before Claire collapsed," I said evenly. "And what about the other 3 secret meetings in Aspen? You and Chin must have had a lot of business to discuss, didn't you? Perhaps about the future of Sterling Industries, a future that didn't include my daughter." Every bit of color drained from Julian's face. He took a step back as if he'd been physically struck. He could explain away an affair, but a business conspiracy behind his wife's back with a known rival of the Sterling family? He couldn't. The trap had sprung. He knew I didn't just know about the mistress. I knew about his ruthless ambition. "Julian," Claire's voice was a weak, broken whisper. He turned to her, his eyes pleading, desperate, searching for any last shred of belief. "I don't want to see you right now. Please leave," my daughter said, her voice barely audible. In that moment, the final flicker of hope in Claire's eyes died, replaced by a painful, liberating truth. The door swung open. 2 large hospital security guards stepped in, followed by Arthur Vance. "Julian Croft," Arthur said, his voice flat. "You are no longer permitted near the patient. Please come with us." Julian didn't fight. He looked like a puppet with its strings cut, shuffling out of the room. Before he left, he turned back and looked at me, his eyes filled with hatred and one silent question. "How did you know?" I just stared back, my own eyes answering for me. "Because I am her mother, and you have no idea what a mother will do for her child." The door swung open. 2 large hospital security guards stepped in, followed by Arthur Vance. "Julian Croft," Arthur said, his voice flat. "You are no longer permitted near the patient. Please come with us." Julian didn't fight. He looked like a puppet with its strings cut, shuffling out of the room. Before he left, he turned back and looked at me, his eyes filled with hatred and one silent question. "How did you know?" I just stared back, my own eyes answering for me. "Because I am her mother, and you have no idea what a mother will do for her child." When the door closed, silence fell. I went back to Claire. She was crying, silent tears rolling down her hollow cheeks. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of disillusionment, of loss, and of a raw truth finally set free. I went to her bed and held her. "It's going to be okay, my love," I whispered. "You're safe now." She nodded in my arms, her body trembling. The first battle was over. We had torn the mask from the wolf. But I knew the real war had just begun. Julian and his allies wouldn't give up so easily.
They would fight to the bitter end for the Sterling kingdom. But they didn't know that they weren't just up against me, Eleanor Sterling. They were up against the legacy, the brilliance, and the foresight of a great man. And in that war, they had already lost. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering. Julian, though barred from the hospital, hadn't been arrested. The toxicology evidence was strong, but circumstantial. He and his expensive legal team were fighting back, painting this as a bitter family dispute. He was leaking stories to the financial press that I, a power-hungry, domineering mother-in-law, was trying to frame him to seize my own daughter's assets. He was playing a dangerous game, turning himself into the victim. Meanwhile, David Chin, the rat in my fortress, made his move. Citing Claire's health and Julian's legal troubles, he called for an emergency meeting of the board of directors. His goal was clear: to hold a vote of no confidence against me as trustee and install an independent committee run by his and Julian's cronies, I was sure, to take temporary control of the company. It was a corporate coup, and they were doing it out in the open. They thought I was too distracted to fight back. They were wrong. On the day of the meeting, I left Claire in the care of the best nursing team. As I was leaving, she took my hand. "Mother," she said, her voice still weak but filled with steel, "show them what the Sterling family is made of." I smiled. "That's exactly what I intend to do, my love." I walked into the Sterling Industries boardroom. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. David Chen sat at the opposite end of the table, looking smug, and sitting right next to him, a defiant smirk on his face, was Julian. He wasn't hiding. He was here to fight, to turn this meeting into his stage. The meeting began. Chen stood up and launched into a well-rehearsed speech about instability, shareholder risk, and the need for new leadership. He was smooth, using corporate buzzwords to mask his treachery. When Chen finished, Julian stood up. The room went silent. He radiated a terrifying confidence, as if he were already in charge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice deep and persuasive, "I know there are many rumors circulating. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Sterling, in her grief and worry for Claire, has made some very serious accusations against me. I love my wife more than anything. Her illness has been the greatest pain of my life." He paused, looking directly at me with an expression of deep sympathy. "But love cannot blind us to the facts. The fact is, Sterling Industries is at risk under Mrs. Sterling's oversight. And the fact is, Claire's health declined because of the pressure placed upon her by her own mother's expectations." He signaled to his lawyer, who projected a series of emails and texts onto the main screen. "These are communications between Claire and her mother over the last 6 months," Julian explained. "As you can see, Mrs. Sterling constantly applied pressure, interfered in our marriage, and criticized my handling of her investments. Claire was under immense stress. I was momentarily stunned. He had masterfully twisted the narrative, painting me as the villain. A few board members began to look at me with doubt. And as for the accusation of infidelity," Julian continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "yes, I met with Miss Kennedy Hayes in Aspen. She is the daughter of a potential investor I was courting for a new Sterling biotech project. Mrs. Sterling, in her old-fashioned way, has turned a business meeting into a scandal." He was so well prepared. Every lie was wrapped in a kernel of truth, making it all the more poisonous. David Chen nodded in approval. The game was turning in their favor. I let the silence hang in the room after he finished. Then, slowly, I rose to my feet. "An excellent performance, Julian," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "You've learned to lie without blinking, but you've forgotten one thing. In this game, you aren't playing against me. You're playing against Richard Sterling." I nodded to Arthur Vance, who was sitting quietly in the corner. He stood, holding a black leather briefcase sealed with red wax. All eyes turned to it. "As you know," Arthur announced, his voice formal and resonant, "Mr. Richard Sterling's official will was executed years ago. However, he also left a sealed codicil to be opened only under a very specific set of circumstances. And, ladies and gentlemen, those circumstances, regrettably, have now been met." Arthur carefully broke the wax seal. The small crack echoed in the silent room. He withdrew a typed document and began to read. "The sealed codicil to the last will and testament of Richard Sterling," Arthur began. "This codicil shall be enacted automatically upon any legal or medical evidence validated by the family's counsel that the health or life of my daughter, Claire Vance, is threatened by the deliberate or negligent actions of her legal husband." Julian and his lawyer sat bolt upright. David Chen frowned, a flicker of unease on his face. Arthur continued, his voice firm. "Upon activation, the following terms take effect immediately and are irrevocable. 1. The inheritance clause for my son-in-law, Julian Croft, as stated in the primary will, is hereby permanently null and void. He shall inherit no assets, no shares, and no power from the Sterling family under any circumstances whatsoever." I glanced at Julian. His mouth was hanging open. 2, Arthur read on, his eyes flicking to David Chen. "All personal assets of the son-in-law that were acquired with or derived from Sterling family funds, including but not limited to investments, real estate, and other valuables, shall be frozen and seized as compensation for the emotional and physical damages inflicted upon my daughter." The room was holding its breath, but the final blow was yet to come. "And 3. Arthur's voice boomed like a judge's gavel. "Any member of the Sterling Industries Board of Directors found to be complicit, cooperative, or otherwise assisting in any plot against the heir's safety or the family's stability shall be immediately stripped of their board seat. Furthermore, per the shareholder agreement they signed upon their appointment, they will be forced to sell their entire holdings back to the Sterling Family Trust for 10% of the current market value." When Arthur finished, the air in the room was thick as concrete. David Chen looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. But Julian, after a moment of shock, suddenly let out a laugh. It was a harsh, crazed, challenging sound. "A brilliant play, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A perfectly laid trap. But you've forgotten one crucial detail. This codicil is only activated if there is proof that I harmed Claire." He stood and paced around the table, a master actor on his stage. "And where is that proof? For months, I was the one by Claire's side. I was the one who sourced the finest herbal teas to help her with her pregnancy stress. Our private nurse knows it. The gardener knows it. Anyone who visited our home knows how well I cared for my wife." He stopped, looking right at me. "You accuse me of harming her? On the contrary, I did everything I could to protect her from outside pressures." He'd said it. He'd proudly admitted to the key action, but twisted it into an act of love. He thought no one could ever prove the malicious intent behind those cups of tea. He was daring me in front of everyone. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a cold, pitying stare. "You're right, Julian. You were very attentive." I nodded to Arthur. Arthur Vance, with a placid expression, pulled another document from his briefcase. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "as requested by Mrs. Sterling, and as part of the procedure for activating the codicil, we commissioned an independent medical review of Miss Claire Vance's condition." He projected the lab report onto the large screen. Charts, numbers, and complex medical terms filled the display. "This report confirms the presence of abnormally high concentrations of scopolamine and alkaloid B in Miss Vance's blood," Arthur explained, his voice clear and sharp. "These are compounds which, when administered in small, prolonged doses, produce symptoms identical to a severe nervous breakdown, including paranoia, extreme fatigue, and can lead to heart failure. A perfect match for Miss Vance's condition upon admission."
Julian froze, the smirk wiped clean from his face. But Arthur wasn't done. "And here is the most interesting part," he said, pointing to a final note on the report. Trace concentrations of these same compounds were found in the residue of an herbal teapot collected from Miss Vance's home. The very same tea that Mr. Croft, as he has just admitted before this entire board, personally brewed for his wife every single night. A dead silence fell over the room. Every eye turned to Julian. The faces that had held doubt now held disgust. The people who had been on his side now looked at him like he was a monster. He had personally confirmed the murder weapon. He had walked right into the final trap. His arrogant defense from moments before had just become his own damning confession. Humiliation and shock washed over his face, turning it from red to a ghastly white. He had been exposed, not by my accusations, but by his own hubris. "The meeting is over," I declared, my voice flat. Julian didn't say another word. He turned and with his stammering lawyer scrambled from the room like a beaten dog. I knew where he was going, not to fight, but to run. Just as I predicted, he went straight to his lawyer's office to frantically move what dirty money he had offshore. But we were one step ahead. The police, armed with an arrest warrant based on our undeniable evidence, were waiting for him. He was handcuffed right there amongst the paperwork of his failed escape. Several months later, on an early spring morning, Claire gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. She named him Richard Sterling Vance. The name wasn't just a memorial, it was a promise. I didn't attend Julian's trial, where he was sentenced to 30 years. To me, he was already a ghost, a lesson learned. The real legacy wasn't in his downfall, but in our rebirth.
Claire, with a strength forged in fire, took her father's place on the board. She was no longer a passive heiress. She had become a queen in her own right, sharp, decisive, and kind. And so our story ends on a sunny afternoon in the family garden. I'm sitting with Claire, watching little Richard take his first wobbly steps. 3 generations of Sterlings, a circle unbroken. The wolf had been defeated, not by force, but by wisdom, by love, and by a legacy protected by those who deserved it. Our kingdom was safe and stronger than ever before.